Hello everyone. Now, before we get started with the video today, I'm going to have to include a brief note about the concept of guilt by association. Now, let's say for instance I work in an office and a colleague of mine is photographed kicking a cat, say. Now, it would be unfair to also declare me guilty of that crime simply for being associated in an unrelated way with the perpetrator. However, let's say an associate of mine is photographed kicking a cat, only this time we're associated because he attends my cat kicking course, where I teach the most effective ways to kick cats. That wouldn't merely be guilt by association then, because the way in which I was associated with him would have a direct link to his actions. That's just something I think it's important to make clear at the start here, and you'll hopefully see why this was needed as we go on. Anyway, hello everyone, again. This is a video about terms like white supremacist, white nationalist, and racist, and it's also a response to a video posted by Stephen Crowder on the 30th of April this year entitled, "What is White Supremacy?" In that video, Stephen is worried about an apparent uncertainty over who counts as a white nationalist or white supremacist or racist, and he's furthermore worried that this confusion will lead to people being banned from various social media sites merely by being accused of belonging to those groups. As always, I'd suggest you watch his video first, so you can be sure I'm not misrepresenting his views. But we'll also briefly talk through Stephen's argument here before we get into responding to specific sections of it. So okay, Stephen opens this video with a flash-forward plea to various social media tech CEOs asking them to define the terms white supremacy and white nationalism, and asks what should count as a bannable offence on social media. Stephen then says he's against various recent white nationalist terror attacks. That's good. But then starts complaining about people politicising the murders, quote, before the bodies are even cold. Which is always a silly thing to say because terror attacks are explicitly political by nature. You can't politicise them. They're already political. Anyway. Stephen then complains about various news shows in the United States calling President Trump a racist, and then moves on to complain about journalists in the media apparently calling all manner of people who disagree with them white supremacists or white nationalists, including media figures like himself and Ben Shapiro. He says that by the time we get to this, quote, actual white supremacist, the term has lost all meaning. Now, you might note here that corporate news journalists calling the president racist have nothing at all to do with suspected white supremacists being banned from social media websites. To the uninitiated, this leap of logic will seem rather confusing, but the actual reason for why Stephen can do this is that the point of his show is to argue against what he calls the left, which for him includes not just actual leftists, but also liberals. Now, he's not able to distinguish between those two groups, obviously. The Democratic Party establishment are also called the left, despite being rather strongly disliked by the left. And also tech CEOs who run huge private corporations are also apparently the left. It's a ridiculous us versus them oversimplification, basically. If you can convince your audience that all these disparate groups count as the left, then manufacturing leftist hypocrisy is easy. The vast majority of the content on Stephen's channel is centered around criticizing these air quote leftists, even if the subject in question is a white nationalist mass murder. Top 5 dumbest leftist reactions to synagogue shooting is a real headline on their website, believe it or not. Anyway, back to the video in question. Stephen then makes various comparative statements about the abilities of various races of people, and asks if saying those statements makes him a racist or a white supremacist. He then says that leftists are calling everything a white supremacist dog whistle, using clips of Donald Trump talking about choking and being accused of referencing the murder of Eric Garner, which happened 5 years ago. Stephen doesn't pick a more recent or relevant example of a racist dog whistle for some reason. You can't use this one anymore, I guess. Stephen then gives various comparative statements about different countries and societies, asking if saying those statements makes him a racist or a white supremacist. Now, if you noticed that this was the exact same point as the IQ thing earlier in the video, you're correct, it's not a very well structured argument, this. Then he waffles about how great Western civilization is for a while, before closing out by saying that if social media platforms are going to ban people for being white supremacists, then they have to define what white supremacy is. The end. Right, so what do we think about this video? Why was it made? Well, the description to the video says Stephen Crowder thoroughly dissects media's use and misuse of the terms white supremacy and white nationalism, separating fact from liberal fiction. But he doesn't thoroughly dissect anything, of course. Once you strip out the regrettable celebrity impressions and complaining about irrelevant criticisms of Donald Trump, nearly all Stephen says with regards to white nationalism and white supremacy is, I don't know what they mean. Can somebody please help me? I say nearly because, to be charitable to Stephen, his one actual point appears to be, there is some uncertainty about who is and isn't a white nationalist, white supremacist, racist, or whatever. And that uncertainty is the fault of the leftist hive mind for overusing those terms where they don't apply. So Stephen wants someone on the left to tell him what those terms mean. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to help Stephen out and answer his questions. So we'll start with the basic definitions of the terms he's confused about. A white supremacist is someone who believes that white people are superior to people of other races and should be in control of them. A white nationalist is an advocate for enforced racial segregation with the aim of creating an ethnically white state. And a racist is someone who believes that a particular race is inherently superior to others. Now, there's obviously a lot of crossover between those terms, but at least in dictionary definition form here, they aren't particularly confusing so far. Now, I'd like to go off on a little tangent here if you'll let me. Either way, you can't stop me. So I'm not here to debate whether any of these terms represent acceptable political positions. They don't. Here in the free marketplace of ideas, I will debate absolutely any argument or position so long as it's debatable. For instance, I won't debate whether 2 + 2 = 5 with you, not because I can't prove it doesn't, but because there's no point. It's a waste of time. Take someone who thinks that 2 + 2 = 5 and will argue the point. I don't want to convince them that they're wrong. I don't want them on my side. If they looked at the evidence and came to that conclusion, who knows what else they think? They're embarrassing. Likewise with questions of equal rights. Whether or not people deserve equal human rights is a question with a right and a wrong answer as clear-cut as the previous example. If you believe, for instance, that white people are inherently superior to other races and deserve to be treated preferentially by society as a result of that, you are wrong. There's nothing to be debated there. Not because I can't explain why you're wrong, but because as things stand, you're incapable of understanding why you're wrong. Anyway, tangent over. Now, as we've seen, Stephen attributes the supposed ambiguity surrounding terms like white supremacist, white nationalist, and so on to leftist and/or liberal overuse of the terms. But I'd like to offer an alternative explanation, something that Stephen never considers in his video, and it's this. Sometimes people lie. Now, that might sound shocking and unbelievable, but stick with me. Take this quote actual white supremacist who Stephen calls a white supremacist. Now, is this really how obvious we need people to be before we'll call them a white supremacist? You have to be at a white supremacist rally proudly showing off a swastika tattoo, because here's the thing. There could be people out there who have some or all of the same political opinions as this man, but who are savvy enough to know it's a bad idea to get a big swastika tattoo. Let's pretend for the purposes of argument that such people exist. Actually, we don't need to pretend that. Let's say you're Stephen Crowder, apologies, and you need a photograph of an actual white supremacist for your internet video. So what do? You go to Google Images, you type in actual white supremacist, and there he is there. Now this photograph is of a man at the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, and it's from a website that says 9% of Americans think it's okay to hold white supremacist or neo-Nazi views. A Washington Post ABC News poll found that 9% of Americans believe holding white supremacist or neo-Nazi views is acceptable. A majority of Americans, regardless of party, think it's unacceptable to hold such views, 83% overall. So that's good. Most confusing to me here, though, is if we click through to the poll, the 8% of people who apparently have no opinion of neo-Nazi views at all. What's going on with them? Just sort of ambivalent, I guess, about the whole Nazism thing. Now, even if we assume that this study was wildly off and 9% is a huge overestimation, if even 1% of the US population thought that holding neo-Nazi views was acceptable, that'd be more than 3 million people. Trust me, they are out there. You see, people who go to far-right rallies and wave swastika flags and do Hitler salutes, we can call them open white supremacists, nationalists, racists, and whatever. But what we also have to be concerned about are people who agree with this man, who themselves are white supremacists and nationalists and racists and so on, but who say that they aren't. Now, there are some people in the right-wing media sphere who are open white nationalists or supremacists. But usually they don't get all that much of an audience because those ideas phrased as clearly as that mean you're very likely to eventually either get fired or banned off whatever sites you're using. Much more common than them are closeted white nationalists who hide behind euphemisms for their actual beliefs. They might say, I'm not a white nationalist, I'm an identitarian. I'm not a racist, I'm a race realist, and so on. They'll say they disavow Nazism and white supremacy, but they're saying that for branding reasons rather than actual ideological disagreements. They do support white nationalism, but they understand that saying so would damage their cause. So to advance white nationalism, they have to first pretend to disavow it. And then separate from that group, there are some pure, shameless grifters with no real opinions of their own, but who have worked out that there's a lot of money and attention to be had in pandering to racists. And now, what's the difference between all these groups of people? The quote, real white nationalists, the closeted white nationalists, and the panderers? Well, functionally, as far as I'm concerned, nothing. They're all spreading the same propaganda. It doesn't matter what they call it or their reason for doing it. If you associate with and support racists and parrot their opinions, you're a racist, regardless of if you say or even think you are. Now, does thinking this mean I'll sometimes label someone a white nationalist or racist or whatever who claims not to be one? Sure. Do I care about that? Not really. In my opinion, the burden of proof is on them to act less like a white nationalist. And for any fans of Steven Crowder who might be watching who think I'm being unfair here, consider the following clip from another of his videos.
So they don't believe in the First Amendment. Whereas white nationalists, when we address the Constitution, don't believe that all people were created equal. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, that's right in there. They don't believe that.
They all agree on one thing. Equality is a dangerous myth. The alt-right is united in rejecting the current dogma that all races are equal.
Now, I know people say he's alt-right. He's a white nationalist.
So who is this guy who Stephen called alt-right and a white nationalist? Well, that's Jared Taylor, editor of the white supremacist magazine American Renaissance. Jared Taylor is a white supremacist and white nationalist and racist, and Steven Crowder was correct to identify him as such. However, Taylor has been described as a white nationalist, white supremacist, and racist by civil rights groups, news media, academics studying racism in the US, and others. Many sources. Taylor has strenuously rejected being called a racist and maintains that he is instead a racialist who believes in race realism. That's a good one. He's also said that he's not a white supremacist, describing himself as a white advocate, and contends that his views on nationality and race are moderate, commonsensical, and fully consistent with the views of most of the great statesmen and presidents of America's past. Yeah, mainly the ones who owned slaves, I think you'll find. Well, what's my point here? Well, Steven Crowder clearly has no objection to calling a racist when he believes the term to be accurate, even if they themselves would prefer the term racialist or whatever else. He feels entitled to make that judgment call there, and that's the same judgment call he's criticising those on the left for making. Now, given that Stephen, in his video, complains about people calling him a white supremacist or nationalist or whatever, let's take a look at some possible reasons that might be, and we'll stick with Jared Taylor here for a second.
So we have on the line, and I guess for those of you video-based, on the screen, Jared Taylor. Now, Jared Taylor is the editor of American Renaissance, the president of the New Century Foundation, and the author of many books on race relations. And we're going to put links to those below. I highly recommend them. It's very data-driven, not ideological, very fact-based, and very eye-opening. It's sort of chilling when you realize the degree to which essential information for the improvement of race relations is kept hidden from people. And the New Century Foundation recently released an updated version of, I guess you could call it a pamphlet, but a very data-driven presentation on the color of crime. It's a report on differences in crime rates by race, an examination of questions of bias in the justice system, and of course, interracial crime statistics.
So that clip was of Jared Taylor being featured on Stefan Molyneux's YouTube channel, with Stefan sharing Taylor's work with his audience and linking in the description to his various websites. Now, Stefan Molyneux is a white nationalist, or at least a white nationalist sympathiser, coming out as such in a documentary about a trip to Poland he made late last year.
First of all, I've always been skeptical of the ideas of white nationalism, of identitarianism, and white identity. However, I am an empiricist, and I could not help but notice that I could have peaceful, free, easy, civilized, and safe discussions in what is essentially an all-white country.
I've spoken out against white nationalism, but I'm an empiricist. I'm listening. I'm listening to my experiences. Can't argue with the facts.
So that's pretty blatant there. He does do the whole, of course, I've always been very skeptical of white nationalism routine, so he can back away from it later if he's called out. It's a wordier version of, I'm not a racist, but, you know. He also calls himself an empiricist, and then offers only anecdotal evidence for now thinking that white nationalism's good, which is pretty funny. So why am I talking about Stefan Molyneux? Well, if we can't always trust what people say when they tell us who they are, how can we tell who is a white nationalist or racist or whatever else? Well, we can ask ourselves, what sorts of things would we see a secret racist do? Well, how about platform other racists and sell their work to your audience to financially support them? And following on from that, Stefan Molyneux has been a guest on Stephen Crowder's show multiple times, and here's a clip of Molyneux advertising a book he wrote on Stephen Crowder's YouTube channel. So a note for YouTubers here. Even if you totally disagree with someone and were planning to completely destroy them in debate with facts and logic, you don't need to do this. You know, have them on the show and let them advertise their merch. You can debate Stefan Molyneux's opinions without once involving him. This is never necessary unless your goal is to support him financially. So anyway, Stephen calls Taylor a white nationalist, but supports Stefan Molyneux financially and shares his work, who then supports Taylor financially and shares his work. The link from Stephen Crowder to someone Stephen Crowder considers a white nationalist consists of one other white nationalist there. Let's not draw any premature conclusions here though, let's be a little more thorough. So, okay, the next behaviour we might see a secret racist engage in is downplaying the danger of white supremacy and white nationalism. You know, you could say, I disavow it, of course, but it's not really that big of a deal, is it?
What do you make of the whole white supremacy thing? The idea that we even have to talk about this seems sort of ridiculous. I just don't think, yes, I think there are some white supremacists, as there always have been. I don't think that there are Nazis running around. Nazis were a political party in Germany in the 1930s. They're not really running around now.
Yeah, and like half the people on sites like Stormfront are feds. Like, it's a big joke online. If you go, I spend a lot of time like in tons of different political communities on Facebook, just like reading it. And if you go into any alt-right Facebook groups, the joke is always if you post anything super Nazi or anything, they're like, oh, Fed, are you a Fed, right?
Right.
Like, they're like, no one does that in real life. No one runs around with Nazi tattoos in real life. You don't see it.
That's Dave Rubin and Lauren Southern there, asking where on earth all the Nazis are just a few months prior to the Unite the Right rally at Charlottesville. You don't see people with swastika tattoos running around anymore. Oh no, there they are, there, and they killed someone. We don't know what we're talking about, clearly. We were fatally incorrect. We apologise and quit, because we're obviously incompetent. Now that's my own fantasy there, I should make clear they didn't actually say that. So how does this relate to Stephen Crowder's video? Well, firstly, his own website goes in pretty hard on the Unite the Right attendees and organisers. It here calls them the Charlottesville supremacists. It calls Richard Spencer an asshole and an unapologetic white supremacist and refers to his smug little Nazi face. That article was shared by Stephen Crowder on Twitter, so we can assume he agrees with those statements. So okay, Stephen Crowder has identified a Unite the Right attendee as an actual white supremacist, and ran an article that called the organiser of the event a smug Nazi. All good so far. Returning to Lauren Southern, however, she would appear to disagree.
Then what? Well, you would agree that some of it exists, right? Like there's something there somewhere that's true.
Yeah, even the Richard Spencers of the world, like they're even them, they're kind of misrepresented as well. Like Richard Spencer is not a white supremacist. He is a white nationalist. He believes in a white ethno-state. He doesn't believe in whites being superior. So
Richard Spencer is not a white supremacist, apparently. He's a white nationalist, according to Lauren Southern. However...
And I don't identify as a white nationalist, just to let that be known. History is often a zero-sum game. History is often about subordination and domination. And it's about patronage and so on. And if we want to try to get away from that in order to be ideologically pure, like, oh, every ethnicity will have its little state, we're not going to really go anywhere.
So why would Lauren Southern lie about Richard Spencer's views? Well, because she's trying to downplay the seriousness and danger of white supremacy, because that furthers her political goals. If more people believe there are no more white supremacists, that's fewer people who could recognize her as a white supremacist. You see, Lauren Southern pals around with various, air quote, identitarian groups, most famously to interfere with migrant rescue operations in the Mediterranean. She shared false information about the Quebec City mosque shooting on Twitter, incorrectly identifying the shooters as Syrian refugees when it was actually a far-right white nationalist. She made a video popularizing the white supremacist Great Replacement conspiracy theory, the same conspiracy theory that inspired the Christchurch mosque shootings that killed more than 50 people in New Zealand. The shooter titled his manifesto, The Great Replacement, even. And Lauren Southern is a frequent guest on Steven Crowder's show. So again, we have someone who all but calls themselves a white nationalist, who downplays the existence of Nazis and white supremacists while sharing their conspiracy theories, being supported by Steven Crowder. But again, let's not jump the gun here, we'll keep going. So this is Milo Yiannopoulos, a former Breitbart contributor who was fired from everything after he said child abuse was okay. Here he is serenading a bunch of neo-Nazis in a bar, including Richard Spencer throwing a Hitler salute. Now, in 2017, a bunch of Breitbart emails were leaked, which included, among other things, a leak of Milo's password for his email account, which was LongKnives1290. Now, that's a reference to both the Night of the Long Knives, which was a Nazi purge carried out by Adolf Hitler, and the 1290 Edict of Expulsion, a royal decree issued by King Edward I of England expelling all the Jews from his kingdom. Well, you know the punchline by now. Milo Yiannopoulos has appeared several times on Steven Crowder's show. Moving on, this chap is Gavin McInnes, founder of the far-right gang The Proud Boys. And this is an easy one. Here's a clip of Gavin McInnes calling himself anti-Semitic and sympathising with Holocaust deniers.
This is basically a brainwashing trip. I mean, I think the Israeli government paid for this, and we had donors too, but I think they were mostly Israelis that assumed that we're going to listen to all this shit we get fed. And that is having the reverse effect on me. I'm becoming anti-Semitic, like at the Holocaust Museum, or as I call it, the Holocaust Museum. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, like at one point the tour guide goes, and there are people who think that this didn't happen. And I felt myself defending the super far-right Nazis just because I was sick of being so much brainwashing. And I felt like going, well, they never said it didn't happen. What they're saying is that it was much less than 6 million and that they starved to death and they weren't gassed, that they didn't have supplies.
Notice how Gavin downplays the actual beliefs of Holocaust deniers there, because of course there are people who think the entire Holocaust was a hoax, including Andrew Anglin from the white supremacist website The Daily Stormer, who wrote about this clip saying, "I completely 100% endorse these statements. Obviously I disagree with the Holocaust happened part, but we can't really expect him not to say that while he's literally still in Israel filming this. Everything else is totally and completely on point and awesome," which is not a sentence you want the Daily Stormer to ever say about any of your opinions. Gavin McInnes also wrote about Richard Spencer back in 2016, saying, "I've known alt-right pioneer Richard Spencer since he got me the job at this magazine, and even he, the head of the snake, comes across as perfectly reasonable in conversation. He doesn't think non-whites can be included in a harmonious America. But everything else on his plate is relatively civil." Gavin McInnes has also provided a platform to Jared Taylor.
The main researcher on this is Edwin Rubenstein. He's a very well-known economist and researcher. He did a really fantastic, thorough job. So
sounds like
what's this?
That's my Jew finger thing.
And of course, Gavin McInnes is a frequent contributor to Stephen Crowder's show. Alright, next up we have Owen Benjamin, who is a comedian apparently. Now, Owen has been on Stephen Crowder's show multiple times, even filling in as host of the show when Stephen Crowder wasn't available. So you'd imagine he's a pretty trusted person around those parts if they let him in the driver's seat, right? Now, Owen Benjamin also does his own internet web streams on YouTube, and let's take a peek at one of those.
But it wasn't gas chambers. It wasn't extermination based on race. What if it literally was work will set you free, work, motherfucker, and they died? That's infinitely more probable. If you're a dictator, right, why would you kill your slaves? Well, I have another artist that I'm a big fan of, Hitler. He was a great artist. He was also a great writer. Mein Kampf and all his paintings, really what he was trying to do is clean Germany, clean it of the parasites, of the fleas. He did not hate Jews. He hated filth, and he was trying to clean up.
And I'm not sure there's much I need to say about that. So, to Stephen Crowder, I'll say this. If you want people to not call you a racist, maybe stop inviting racists onto your YouTube show that you do. And if you're confused about who is and is not a white nationalist or white supremacist, maybe before whining about the left, you should ask the various guests who come on your show to define those terms. Because if sympathizing with white nationalism, platforming racists, sharing white supremacist propaganda, questioning the Holocaust, and outright saying Hitler was good don't make you a racist or white supremacist, what does, man? A big swastika tattoo? That's it, isn't it? It's just the big swastika tattoo. Now, I'm certain some Stephen Crowder fans will protest my last two examples there, Gavin McInnes and Owen Benjamin, because they've quite recently been in trouble with Blaze TV, the network that hosts Stephen Crowder's show. So if the network doesn't want to work with those people anymore, surely that's them being disciplined for their racist behaviour and all is well, right? However, Stephen Crowder was apparently worried about being made out to be some network stooge following Blaze TV orders, so he addressed both of these controversies publicly.
Listen, this is Mug Club. We're funded by you, the viewer at Mug. So let me tell you, I had no idea about a lot of this stuff going on, okay? I've never worked for the Blaze. I don't work for the Blaze. This is something that is separate, where we actually allow you to get more value for your buck in agreement with CRTV, I guess now the Blaze, where you get more content. I didn't know about the Gavin McInnes situation until you did. And let me be really clear. Gavin McInnes has an open seat and invitation to work on a permanent basis here on this show if he wants to. He knows it. And now, by the way, also do his own show. And by the way, I want to make sure this is really clear. Owen was never let go from this show. Owen could still write for this show, and I love Owen. Owen's a brilliant writer.
So Stephen Crowder is happy to keep working with these people, apparently. Gavin McInnes is still guesting on his show. So, you know, make of that what you will. I'd like now to talk about Stephen's various comparative statements he makes throughout the video, so let's have a listen to a couple.
Is believing that the United States, is believing that America is superior to Mexico, white supremacy. What if I were to say that white people, on average, have higher IQ scores than black people, on average? Is that white supremacy?
So then, did those statements, what Stephen Crowder said, make him a racist? Well, I've actually explained my thoughts about such statements in a fairly old video of mine, but I'll give the short answer here. It depends on the context in which the statements were said. So let's take the statement, black people on average have lower IQ scores than white people. Now, I'm going to say that again in two different contexts, and we'll see if we can spot the difference. So okay. Black people, on average, have lower IQ scores than white people. However, lacking equal access to education and economic equality, this statement by itself can tell us nothing about any possible differences in cognitive ability inherent to black and white people. Without accounting for social influences, this statement is practically useless. I could also go into the problems with IQ as a measure of intelligence here, and especially the problems with the book The Bell Curve, which is the study mentioned in the screenshot that Crowder shows. However, I have a whole video dedicated to the bell curve in the works, and I don't want to spoil it here, so I'll just say it's rubbish. So okay, let's say that phrase again, but in the manner of a clueless racist. I want to create a white ethno-state and kick out all of the black people because black people on average have lower IQ scores than white people. You see, I said the same words, Stephen, but in a different context. Whether or not they're racist depends on why you're saying them. So I suppose the pertinent question here is, in what context did you say them? Well, they're in a video, the goal of which is to create the impression that the terms white nationalist and white supremacist have lost all their meaning, hosted on the same channel that features you doing things like this.
Of China.
So, yes, I deem this a pretty racist context in which to say those statements. Running defense for racists is racist. Platforming other racists on your show is racist, and I shouldn't have to say this one, but dressing up as offensive racial stereotypes is racist. Stephen Crowder's a racist, basically. Now, to be fair, Crowder's show's primary purpose seems not to be any conscious attempt to spread racist beliefs for their own sake. The show is more of a hastily constructed, anti-left stream of consciousness, made for what can be mockingly referred to as entertainment purposes. It turns out, though, that if you're in the anti-left, pro-right entertainment game, there's just a lot of overlap with being a racist. And there's no difference functionally, so, it doesn't really matter whether they're consciously doing it or not. To paraphrase a famous quote here, don't believe people when they tell you who they are. Believe people when they show you who they are. Stephen Crowder can disavow racism a million times, and it won't mean anything if he keeps sharing his platform with racists and white nationalists. All we can infer from that is that either he's a racist or a white nationalist or a white supremacist. Thanks a lot for watching, folks. There is one question left I haven't answered yet, however. Who should be banned by all those evil, lefty, tech CEOs? Well, I happen to think that every white nationalist, white supremacist or racist should be banned by every website they ever use. Now, how can I defend thinking that? Well, it's because I believe in freedom of speech. The idea that you can have a social media community in which everyone, racists and racial minorities, homophobes and gay people, transphobes and trans people all freely discourse and speak their minds equally is a doomed liberal fantasy. If you let the KKK recruit on your website, black people understandably aren't going to trust you and they'll not want to use it. If you signal to your user base that harassing gay people doesn't violate your terms of service, gay people will not feel safe expressing themselves on your platform. This is a much worse affront to free speech than banning a few bigots is. We can't be tolerant of intolerance here, we have to pick a side necessarily. Trying to keep everyone on board, which is the strategy favoured by capitalist corporations obviously, as that's the scenario with the theoretical largest return even if it's unworkable in the long run, can only lead to that community eventually being overrun by intolerant bigots. So the solution is fairly simple, really. Just ban them all. And if they don't like it, fuck them.